This was found, I think, like 2015-ish, 2016. This is a dinosaur tail encased in amber. Amber is fossilized tree sap. Often we find insects like mosquitoes, moths, beetles trapped in this fossilized amber. So you actually have them pretty well preserved. Well, if you look closely, you can actually see there's an insect right there from the dinosaur age, trapped in amber. But here's what they really thought was interesting. What are those? Those are feathers. Those are fossilized feathers. This is 100 million years old. This sets it back to about the Jurassic or Cretaceous period, which I'll catch you up to speed on today. Not really. So this is actually a CT scan of what the tail looked like without the feathers. There's some feathered tail that was originally thought to be remains of plants. But I just remember seeing that. That's pretty irrefutable. That's 100 million years old. Pretty well preserved. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the history of life on Earth, how life has actually been changing and where life may have actually started. Now, we don't have all the answers. And that's something you have to admit when you're in science is you don't have all the answers, so don't make up your own conclusions. You have to have evidence for it. Now, have you all ever at least heard of the movie Apollo 13? Okay, well, it's based on a true story. The Apollo missions were when people would go to not only space, but we would send men to the moon. They had this giant rocket, bigger than anything we've ever had, called the Saturn V rocket. It had enough oomph to get you all the way to the moon, which is about 250,000 miles from here. It takes a few days to get there. Well, in the movie, they show NASA's control room, and they have these big computers and all this technology. That was back in the early 70s, late 60s. The technology in this phone right here is more than what they had in the entire control room in NASA. You now have it in your pocket. Your parents were alive during Apollo 13. They were around. More technology here. Well, what I'm getting at is our understanding of science and technology, math, all that STEM stuff, engineering, and just the natural world and the universe is always improving. A 1,000 years ago or so, everybody believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. It's called the geocentric model. Then they learned that's not the case. About 500 years ago, everybody thought that the Earth was flat. That's not the case. There's still some things that people tend to believe in here or there, but with scientific discovery and investigations and evidence, we're able to debunk those. So every day and every year and every decade and every 100 years, every century, we're learning more and more and more and more. So what I want to do is I want to give you a little visual. You don't need to write this down. Let's say that this line here is what we know. This is everything we know so far about everything. This line is everything. Like once you get here, you're done. You know it all. Would you say that over the course of human history that this gap here, which is what we don't know, is increasing or decreasing? So we're continuing to not know more? Okay. So over time, this gap is starting to get smaller. Hold on. And smaller and smaller. And one day, who knows, we might get that close. But we're still working on it. Think back during the Civil War, the 1860s. Nobody knew what a germ was. Nobody knew what blood types were. Nobody knew what bacteria was or what the carbon atom was. Nobody knew about gravity, you know, the Einstein's laws of gravity and how gravity can actually act as waves. Nobody knew about this stuff, but we're learning more and more and more. We have this stuff called antimatter, and we have nuclear weapons, nuclear technology, and we're trying to make fusion energy, which is like having a sun on Earth. So what I'm getting at is we don't have all the answers. Who knows if we ever will? But that gap, which represents what we don't know, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller all the time. So when we talk about how life may have started on this earth, we don't have the conclusive 100% answer yet here in 2021. Our understanding is a lot better in 2021 than it was in 1921, and it was better in 1921 than it was in 1821. So we're continuing to learn more and more and more. Maybe by the time you guys have kids in high school, we will have finally cracked that code. We have a lot of evidence that convalesces and brings the whole idea of how life may have started. But as far as what was able to go from organic molecules to actually sentient life, we're still not there. Today we're going to talk about the history of life, the history and origin of life, actually. And throughout today, I'm going to mention things like speciation. I'm going to mention extinctions. We're going to go over something called the geologic timeline. And we're going to go over other types of evidence for how life may have actually gotten started here on Earth. Okay, so let me just find my notes. There they are. All right, well, if you look up on the whiteboard, I'm going to put something like that on these notes. What that is basically the history of complex life. The pink is today. And then as you go up, you go to the dinosaurs, then the green is before the dinosaurs, and the black is before the dinosaurs. This is like the very beginning. So we're going to talk about the origin of life and what evidence we have to try to understand where it actually all started. So we have to use scientific evidence for this. We can't just come up with stories. We can't come up with ideas that are unfounded. We have to use scientific evidence. Yes, Jake?
We did finish the post.
Thanks for reminding me. We'll try to do it at the end of class. I'll keep that in mind. All right. So the three evidences we're going to do are geology. Geology is the Earth. What better place to study how Earth and life on Earth got started than the Earth itself? If you're a geologist, you love rocks. Rocks are your thing. You love them. You don't want to ever give them up. Now, to the common person, studying rocks might seem really boring and bland, but the rocks tell a story. There's different layers in the rocks. When I went to the Galapagos and I went to Martinique, which is in the Caribbean, you can see the layers of different colors. And each color, which is a layer, represents a different time period. I was trying to explain to a friend of mine, I went all bio teacher on him and said, every layer on those rocks, it represents probably a few million years. He goes, no way. But yeah, that red layer is probably a few million years. The white layer underneath it's a few million, and so on and so on. So it's like a cake, and every layer represents X millions of years. Well, in geology, the evidence of life that's buried in the rocks are fossils. Then we have chemistry and chemical evidence. When it comes to chemistry, we're going to learn something called abiogenesis, the formation of using inorganic molecules to make organic molecules. And then lastly, we have molecular evidence. Whenever you hear molecular, I need you to think of things like DNA. And this is all going to be about homologies. All of you have adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. So does every living thing that has ever lived. That kind of sounded weird. Every living thing on Earth and everything that has ever lived is ATCG. Every mammal, every fish, reptile, amphibian, bird, invertebrate, worm, even plants. That oak tree outside that you like to sit underneath during lunch, that has ATCG as well. And when we get to look at molecular, we got to find out, well, where did all of our DNA come from? Every living thing has the same DNA structure. This goes back to the last universal ancestor. We call this the LUA. This is the OG of common ancestors. This is the original, the first ones. As you've heard me say before, if you go back in time far enough, you will find the common ancestor to everything. And as you can see on my board, that's about 3.5 billion years ago. Yep. All right, so let's get into an actual timeline. I'm going to try to keep this a little brief because we still, as Jake reminded me, we have to do the pre and post-zygotic. So a timeline in geology and looking at the fossils is called a geologic timeline. In fact, have any of you ever stepped foot in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City? It's a pretty cool place. Multiple stories, multiple floors. Now, on the fourth floor are all the fossils and all the skeletons. Well, it's no coincidence that when they have you start your little journey through their fourth floor, you start right here. And then as you're walking through the museum, you're going forward in time. You start with a bunch of fish and invertebrates, then you get to amphibians, and then you get to reptiles, then mammal-like reptiles. And then you have the dinosaur section. And then you have everything after the dinosaurs, the giant mammals like a big sloth or a woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tigers. Or they prefer them to be called saber-toothed cats. There's no evidence that they had stripes. Well, nonetheless, the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Now, if you're wondering how in the world can you know that? One word, uranium. Uranium is the largest naturally occurring element on Earth. We use it for nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Everything on the periodic table that is after uranium is synthetic. It's man-made. It's element number 92. Well, in chemistry, if you've taken chemistry, you hopefully remember something called half-lives. A half-life is the amount of time it takes for half of an isotope to decay. Well, isotopes can be radioactive. They're called radioisotopes, and they slowly break down over time. That's called decay. Well, the amount of time it takes for half of it to decay is called a half-life. Uranium's half-life just so happens to be 4.5 billion years. So all the uranium that is existing right now on Earth is after one half-life.
So only one layer of its isotopes.
Say that again?
So only one of its layered isotopes.
Only all the uranium that there was when Earth formed has gone through one half-life so far. Have you ever heard of carbon dating? Carbon dating uses the same scheme, but its half-lives are far shorter. One half-life of carbon is about 5,000 years, give or take a few hundred. So we use carbon dating to find out how old the pyramids were, how old mammal fossils are. Other radioisotopes have longer half-lives, maybe millions of years, tens of millions of years, but uranium is 4.5 billion years. So if you think about it, all the uranium that is on Earth today, we use it for bombs. I mean, we used it in Hiroshima, in Nagasaki, when America dropped those bombs on Japan. That stuff, that uranium, was only through one half-life. So basically what I'm saying is all the radioisotopic uranium that there is now is half of what there was when Earth started. And so in order for it to have gone through that whole span of 4.5 billion years, it had to be here on Earth. Yes, Ella?
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm still not really understanding how you know it's 4.5 billion years.
Because we can measure how long it takes to decay and then just extrapolate that over how long it takes for half of its mass to decay. So if I have 10 pounds of uranium, U-235, how long is it going to take for it to decay to 5 pounds? It's going to take 4.5 billion years. We can extrapolate that mathematically to determine how long it takes for it actually to decay to where it gets to a point where half of its entire mass is gone.
Yeah, but doesn't that also all depend on like conditions and stuff like that?
Nope. It's just a natural process. It's natural radioactive decay. The conditions don't matter. So let me ask you all this. Do you know how old the solar system and the universe is? Any idea? Do you think it's, how much older than the Earth do you think it is? Or do you think it's the same age as the Earth?
It's the same age as Earth.
It's older. How do we know? Well, right now, we know that the universe is about 13 billion years old. How do we know that? And that can change. We know that because of meteorites. Meteorites hit planets and moons all the time. You look at the moon, it's covered in craters. The Earth is covered in craters. You just don't see them as well because we have jungles and forests. There's a big crater in Arizona called like Crater Park or something like that. I think I have it up here. No, it's not in Mexico. It's in Arizona. The big crater that wiped out the dinos is in Mexico. There it is. So this is the crater that's in Arizona. This is actually pretty small. You can visit it. I don't know if you can go in it. I don't know. But the one that hit Mexico that wiped out the dinosaurs hit the Yucatan Peninsula, which is this orange thing over here on the side. If that hit, we would definitely see it because that blue tip up there is Florida. And that, the explosion alone would have wiped us out. But anyway, meteorites are different than meteors in that meteorites actually hit the surface of the Earth. A meteor burns up in the atmosphere. So if you're looking up and I saw a shooting star, it likely just burned up in the atmosphere on a reentry. But the meteorites actually hit the Earth. And the meteorites that we have recovered as recently as this year, 2021, they are made up of minerals and rocks that are older than the Earth itself. We have found meteorites that are 7 billion years old or 10 billion years old. Guess what's the oldest one that we've had? 13. That's the oldest one that we've ever recovered. It just so happens that when we have our space telescopes, you may have heard of the Hubble telescope that's been decommissioned. There's been bigger telescopes since then. It can only see 13 billion years into the past. That's it. Now, if you want to kind of be freaked out and have your head spin about light years, a light year is a measurement of distance. So, for instance, you may have heard of the constellation Orion. It's the hunter. It's a bow and arrow. Well, I think it's the foot, either the foot or the hand of Orion is a star called Betelgeuse. For real. Betelgeuse. And Betelgeuse is about 460 light years away, which means that 460 years ago, when that light left, it's just now arriving. Right now, tonight, Betelgeuse will shine on Earth. The light that is leaving that star today will take 465 years to travel through space to eventually get to Earth. So when you see Betelgeuse, you're actually looking into the past. Because for all we know, Betelgeuse could have exploded today. Let's just pretend that. Let's say Betelgeuse explodes today. Gone, extinguished. How much longer will its light that it released before its explosion continue to travel through space?
465, but I have a question.
What?
So, can't telescopes modify the amount of time that it takes for the light years to see it, depending on the magnification?
No, because telescopes can't manipulate space-time. Yes, Ella?
So with the light years, like, can we not like see the light moving?
No. It's just light travels at, you want to get this? Light travels 186,000 miles per second. In metrics, that's the 30, what is it? It's 3.00 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 300 million meters per second. If you wanted to travel the speed of light, you would have to go around the Earth 7 times in 1 second. It goes pretty fast.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, why would you like see it moving?
No, you can't see it moving. Light, you don't see it moving. Do you see light shining, like leaving those lights?
I don't really understand that you're saying it's moving.
Light travels through space. Turn off that light.
Like when you, like...
Okay, lights off. Light it up. Light's filling up this room. It's
like
it's illuminating the room.
Sun, it was 7 minutes ago.
Correct. 8 minutes, actually.
It's what?
8 minutes, actually.
Okay. So like when the sun set, it actually set 8 minutes prior to when...
Ella, look out the window. You see the sunlight outside? That sunlight is 8 minutes old.
Yes.
So the sun could have exploded. Right now, we won't know for 8 minutes when everything goes dark. The light has to travel through space to get to us. It's just like if I throw this ball at you, that ball traveled through space. I didn't throw it very fast. But if that was light, that would be 186,000 miles per second. The moon is 1 light second from Earth. The sun is 8 light minutes from Earth. Betelgeuse is about, I think, 460 light years from Earth. So you're actually looking in the past. As Jake just said, when you see the sun and it sets, it actually set 8 minutes ago. Its light just finally got to us. All right, we need to move on. So what I want to do now is I want to transition over to this diagram I have. And this is called the geologic timeline. I had this written on the board. You can add any part. I'm going to tell you guys to highlight some parts. Yep, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to do that either. I'm trying to zoom in. 1 sec. There we go. Okay, so if you imagine the Earth as a 24-hour clock, like the entire history of Earth, humans don't show up. It's that little sliver right there until a few seconds before midnight. All the pyramids, the wars, the technology, TikTok, all that stuff has only shown up in the last few seconds if you put the entire history of Earth on a 24-hour clock. Dinosaurs don't show up until about 11 o'clock. And the first mammals don't show up until a little bit after that. Really complex life doesn't show up until about 10 o'clock. So the majority of life, the majority of the history of Earth is just bleh. There's nothing really. So let's start at the very beginning. The first time eon is known as the Hadean eon. What's Greek god you sort of see in that name? Hades. Hades is the Greek god of the underworld. He's basically Greek's version of Satan. This is a pretty good name because Earth was like a hellscape. There was this fire and lava and molten gas, like molten rock and toxic gases. Just awful, awful, awful place. But this purple line represents life. There's a few things that happen here. We got the formation of the moon, and then we have something called the heavy bombardment, which is about 3.9 billion years ago. The heavy bombardment is when the Earth just got pummeled by meteorites all over the place. Well, one of the big evidences we have for life is that these meteorites, and they still hit the Earth today, there was one that hit a couple of years ago, and scientists found something remarkable on these meteorites. They found amino acids. The same amino acids that are in your bodies, that are made from your DNA, through translation, were found on these meteorites that came from the deep space and they just hit the Earth. So one hypothesis as to how life may have gotten started on Earth, the raw ingredients for it, is when the heavy bombardment just pummeled the Earth, and some of these amino acids that were being carried on the asteroids and the meteorites kind of seeded onto the Earth. It could be. What if this, Jake? Imagine this. China, Dubai, and America both have Mars rovers rolling around on the surface of Mars. What if they find a microscopic organism? First off, that's aliens. Aliens would exist if we find them. 2, let's say we scoop them up, put them in a pouch, and shoot it back to Earth, and we recovered the little pouch. We got Martian organisms, and we look at the DNA, and the DNA is the same structure as ours. What would that mean? Common ancestry. It would mean common ancestry. We had the same DNA as something on Mars. That'd be pretty wild. Well, nonetheless, we have the first prokaryotes, as you see up on the board, about 3.5 billion years ago. Those are going to be heterotrophs. And then we have the first photosynthesizers, and this was a big deal, everybody. The first photosynthesizers actually released oxygen into the atmosphere. Now, this did cause kind of an extinction because it was changing the atmosphere. The atmosphere was filled with toxic gases, one of which is carbon dioxide, and another is methane. That heats the Earth up. You know what oxygen does? It cools things down. And so the Earth was changing. But I want to remind you of something. What major process takes place in your cells before cell respiration? And it is an anaerobic process. It's in your cytoplasm. No, not fermentation. You're on the right track, though. G. Glycolysis. The fact that all of you perform glycolysis, which is anaerobic, is evidence that all life evolved here before there was even oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. Yes, Ella?
So on another planet, would like organisms are they likely to have the same basis as us, or would they have different bases?
I don't know. No idea. I can't really speak to that. I'm not an astrobiologist. All right. Now, this navy blue line. This represents the first eukaryote. So when we now have endosymbiosis, bigger cells absorbing smaller cells. And then the sky blue is going to be multicellular life, things like amoebas and very, very simple organisms, maybe made up of just a few dozen cells. But we're getting somewhere. But there's really nothing major to show yet until we get up to here. Look at all those colors. This is where life really got started. We're going to start our notes about 542 million years ago at the beginning of what we call the Paleozoic Era. These are where you have the giant bugs, the fish, amphibians, and reptiles. The Mesozoic Era is the age of the dinosaurs. And hiding in the shadows were little mammals. I'm not talking about tigers and lions and giraffes. I'm talking about shrews, squirrels, and moles. And you also have the evolution of birds. And then the Cenozoic Era is where we are now. This is the age of mammals. Dinosaurs are gone. Mammals took over.
Wait, so the Paleozoic, like, what do you mean the giant bugs?
I'll tell you in a sec. Do you like bugs?
Like plain size.
Dragonflies the size of an eagle. Centipedes as long as a truck. Like a pickup truck, not a semi-truck.
The ones that they show like in the movies.
Yeah. What?
Like, if you set it in a line now, like,
It would be huge. It would be probably the size of an alligator.
Show us a picture.
There are no pictures. They're just drawings. If we have time. We still have a lot to get to, guys. Okay. So I'm going to start in the Paleozoic era. We're going to start 542 MYA, million years ago. This is where life really, really, really got started. Now, I don't want to negate the heavy bombardment or the oxygenation of Earth's atmosphere. So what I would recommend to all of you is you walk out of here today, grab your phone, and take a photo of this whiteboard. I'm not going to write everything I have in black, but I'm going to start with everything I have in green. But I don't want to disregard everything I have in black. Notice that in black, I call it the pre-Cambrian time. Well, 542 million years ago, we had the Cambrian period. And in the Cambrian period, you had something called the Cambrian explosion. This is a significant event. Now, to the untrained ear, you would hear Cambrian explosion, you think, oh, something blew up. No, it's actually the opposite. It kind of sounds like an extinction. This is actually where there was a dramatic speciation event. Lots of new species, major speciation. This is where evolution really hit the accelerator. And most of these organisms were invertebrates. We're talking crustaceans. The biggest crustacean was called the Anomalocaris. It was about, I don't know, this big. It could swim. You know, not a lot of crustaceans can swim. Obviously, shrimp can, but crabs and lobsters are bottom dwellers. This guy could swim. It would kind of be like a magic carpet. That was the biggest predator at the time. Well, not only were there massive crustaceans, this is also the first vertebrates, our ancestors. And what were the first invertebrates? Were they birds? No. What were they? Fish. They were the size of your fingernail, very, very small. Okay, after this period, we have the Ordovician period. The Ordovician is where fish begin to diversify. And by the way, if you ever wanted to know the difference between fish and fishes is in reference to one fish species. Fishes, there are multiple fish species. A little fun fact. And then, we have our first mass extinction. Red line represents an extinction. Not all life gets wiped out. I want to make that very clear to everybody. If all life was wiped out in an extinction, we wouldn't be here. When I say an extinction, I would say like 60% or 70% of life was wiped out. That's typically on average, 60 to 70%. Anything over 40 pounds, gone. This is known as ELE, number 1, or extinction level event. Number one. This was, it's really hard to reconcile what this is, but it's a lot of scientists think it was an ice age of some sort of climate change that made things colder. Okay, the third one in the Paleozoic era was the Silurian period. And this is where fish begin to dominate. And you actually have jaws, like fish actually have teeth. So you have the hunters, you have the hunted. Where there's teeth, there's predators. And where there's predators, there's prey. And so you have the hunters and the hunted, predator-prey relationships. And then in the Devonian period, there's a new type of creature that starts to show up. Well, we have our first insects. And they actually go on land. You've likely seen cartoons or spoofs of some amphibian, kind of like Tiktaalik rosea, crawling out of the ocean. Oh, it's the first animal on land. It was actually invertebrates, like crustaceans and arachnids and insects. They came out of the ocean first. Well, we followed not too long after. We had the first amphibians. All right, so now we have vertebrate life on land. And then, extinction number 2. These extinctions are named after the periods in which they follow. So we have the Ordovician, the Devonian. That's 2 so far. The next one is a very important period. I want you guys to know the significance of this. The Carboniferous period. There's a reason why it's called carbon. For all of you that drive and use oil and fuel and gasoline, those are fossil fuels. They come from this period. They come before the dinosaurs. Next time you're putting oil in your car or putting gasoline in your car, think of this period. What happened? Hold on a second. I do not know what just happened. Give me a second. So while this is fixing, the Carboniferous period is where we get all of our fossil fuels from. Why does it say 2020? All right, I'll just have to start off here, guys. There we go. I think that's good. Let me get caught up. Apparently something happened. Make sure I'm still recording. Okay. All right. Sorry for that little delay. I have no idea what just happened. This second red line is ELE number 2. And the period after the Devonian is called the Carboniferous. And as I was saying, all the fuel, all the gasoline, all the oil that we get is from this period. The Earth was basically one giant forest. We call it a coal-producing forest. This is carbon. Coal is carbon. And everything that has a beginning has an end. And all these forests got buried deep into the earth over the millions and millions of years. They just get buried and buried and buried. This is what oil rigs dig up. This is what oil fields in Texas are digging up. All in the Middle East, you know, there's a huge amount of oil out there. It comes from this period. This is where it all comes from. This is where we also get the first reptiles. Now, Jake was asking about insects. The reason why this period had so much, as a consequence of there being so much plant life on the earth, the oxygen levels on Earth were bigger than they have ever been. They were up to 40% oxygen in the atmosphere. And when oxygen levels are really high, insects can get a lot bigger. There were dragonflies the size of your eagles. There was a spider that would have been preying on cats. There were centipedes as long as gators. They were really, really big insects. And the only reptiles really were just like little lizards. I don't know. Probably not as much. The bigger you are, the more demanding your needs are. And then we have the Permian period. This is where we have something like called a mammal-like reptile. These are like the missing links between reptiles to mammals. And also, this is when Pangea was actually formed. But this Pangea was actually not a great thing for the Earth. There are these things called jet streams and ocean currents that transport warm water to cool areas. For instance, there's a jet stream that transports warm tropical heat from the Caribbean Sea to the United Kingdom. It's what keeps the UK from freezing over. Whenever those currents stop, you get a lot of climate change. Well, when Pangea formed, there was really only one big ocean. A lot of the ocean currents stopped. And this led to the most disastrous extinction of all time. That's why I'm making double lined. This is the third extinction in order, but is the worst. It is number one in devastation. This is ELE number 3. It's called the Permian extinction or the Great Dying. It was really, really bad. Really bad. It took Earth, 90% of life was wiped out. It almost didn't come back. It did, or we wouldn't be here. But it was really tough. Okay, I'm running low on time, so I'm going to hustle through these guys. We have the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous periods. These were the age of the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for this time period. Not only did dinosaurs exist during this time period, but you also had small mammals and the evolution of birds. And what was that dino bird? That maybe I'll ask you on your test for extra credit? No, pterodactyl is not a bird. No, not a velociraptor. Archaeopteryx. You better know it. Spelling counts.
How do you spell it?
Archaeopteryx. Look it up, guys. I'm running low on time. I've gone over that already. Go to Google on your phone and just put on the microphone and say Archaeopteryx. Okay, well, there are a couple extinctions here. This red line represents extinction number 4. And then this red line here represents extinction number 5. Number 5 is the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. We call this the KT boundary. And that's the most recent extinction. So there's 5 in all. Now, I want you to remember that an extinction is pretty bad for the organisms that are in charge at the time, like the dinosaurs or what have you. But it's a great opportunity for other species to try to take over. We call those niches. If everybody, let's say everybody at the McDonald's on Southdale Mabry gets fired. McDonald's is going to stay in business. Everyone gets fired. They all were like dealing drugs in the kitchen. So everybody gets fired. This creates job vacancies. New people can come in and get a job. How many of you had Mr. Elliott for chemistry? He retired back in February. We had a replacement like 2 days later. There's an open niche. There's an open job. Whenever something leaves or dies, there is something new to replace it. Nature hates a void. It doesn't like an empty job, so it wants to fill those roles. There's a radio show host who died recently. A lot of people liked him, and people say, oh no, he's been on the radio since the 80s. He's been on the radio for 40 years. Who are we going to listen to now? And I'm saying, somebody's going to take his spot. There's a vacancy. There's an open niche. Someone will fill that role. It's always going to happen.
What does the KT boundary stand for?
Cretaceous and Tertiary. I don't know why they like to use a K when there's a C, but you know, the K just sounds sharper than C. So KT boundary means Cretaceous to the Tertiary, and that's where I'm going to finish this off. Tertiary and Quaternary.
Is the KT boundary on extinction?
Yes, that's the asteroid. This is the age of mammals, and from those mammals is where humans came from. All right, running low on time. I want to get to this. So on your notes, after that was all geologic. That was a lot. That was all geology. After that, I want you to write chemistry evidence. And I want you to check out this diagram. The name of this is called the Urey-Miller experiment. I'll write it up here. Urey-Miller experiment. What this experiment proves is that there's another source of amino acids other than meteorites. Here's what this entails. In this really round chamber are toxic gases that are believed to have been in early Earth's atmosphere. Methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, toxic stuff. No oxygen. Oxygen didn't exist early on. And Miller and Yuri would have this electrical spark to represent the lightning in the atmosphere. And they wanted to see what would happen. This is what science is all about. Trial and error. Just see what happens and record your observations. What they noticed is when lightning would interact with these toxic gases, something was produced. And it ended up in this chamber, the ocean. And they would withdraw what formed in this chamber, and it was amino acids. Same amino acids in us. So this proved that in early Earth, it could have been possible that all the lightning in the sky could have zapped the toxic gases in the atmosphere, and that could have produced the amino acids. Now, traditionally, we say DNA makes RNA, and RNA makes protein. Well, back then, it was the opposite. Instead of it going DNA, RNA, protein, it was amino acids. Amino acids formed peptides. Peptides formed RNA. And RNA formed DNA. So in the grand history of organic molecules on Earth, proteins came first. And then nucleic acids came after that. And at the end, you had carbs and you had lipids. This is chemical evidence. This is how we've learned that you could take inorganic molecules like methane or hydrogen gas, and you can actually form organic molecules like amino acids and nucleic acids. This is more evidence that we're really starting to scaffold how life could have gotten started. And then finally, let's do molecular evidence. Now, something that the AP Biology exam at College Board would really like to sneak under the table and kind of surprise you with is called a molecular clock. So this is what this will take me to the end of class. I have 5 minutes. I'm going to try to get this all in there. A molecular clock estimates the rate of mutation in species. So what is a mutation, guys? A change in the what? Change in DNA. And if you have enough changes in DNA, you can have a new species. Well, if you reverse that, if you have two species that are very similar, I want to know when did their common ancestor exist. So I want to give you a simulation here. Let's say I have a lion. And what is a very close living relative of a lion? A tiger. Okay, they share a fairly recent common ancestor, but I want to know how long ago it was. This is why we use molecular clock. We want to find out how long ago were they really one and the same thing. So what we do is we study something called mtDNA. This is mitochondrial DNA. It's DNA that's found in all of our mitochondria. The reason we use this is it mutates slowly, not as fast as nuclear DNA. So we're going to study the mitochondrial DNA of the lion. We're going to study the mitochondrial DNA of the tiger. And through DNA analysis, what they find, I'm going to make up this number, full discretion, I'm just making it up to make it easier to understand. Scientists find that between a lion and a tiger, there are 8 mutations. That's all that separates a lion and a tiger. 8 mutations, that's it. Just making it up, hypothetically. Well, we use a molecular clock, and we study the rate of change. How often does their DNA just naturally mutate? Well, they learned that lions and tigers experience 2 mutations every 2 million years. So slow things down for a moment. We have 3 minutes. If a lion and a tiger are only separated by 8 mutations, okay, and both of their mitochondrial DNA suggests that they go through 2 mutations every 2 million years, hypothetically, how many millions of years ago were they the same thing? 8. So to make this understandable, I think this helps. Okay, so these black numbers represent the number of mutations. How many years did it take to go from 0 mutations to 2 mutations? How many years how many millions of years for every 2 mutations? 2 million. Okay, so we have 2 mil. And how about to go from 2 mutations to 4? 2 mil. 4 mutations to 6? 2 million. And 6 mutations to 8? 2 million. So what's 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2? That's 8 million years. So if you reverse the mutations, you'll go back in time, and you can say that the lion and the tiger basically had the same DNA 8 million years ago. That's when their common ancestor lived, 8 million years ago. They were the same thing. And it's just through the natural processes of speciation, they mutate. So here's 2 mutations, then we go up to 4, and then 6, and we're currently up to 8. We can measure the rate of mutation. This is how we find out how long ago our common ancestor, the great apes, lived, by how often our DNA mutates. That's a molecular clock. Bring up.